Welcome back, fiber friends, to the Wool to Gold channel. My name is Brian, I am your host, and today we are going to be doing another art yarn tutorial. Specifically, we're going to be teaching you how to spin a lock spun yarn. Lock spun yarn, sometimes called wolf spins by those who are a little bit older than I. No shade there, it's just the truth. I think what people call this kind of spin really depends on who taught you to spin and what generation you learned your spinning during. And so today we're going to be talking about lock spinning. We're going to be using wool locks. However, this tutorial, a lot of this can be applied to mohair spinning as well. I spin a lot of mohair locks. Maybe I'll do another video where I show you guys with the mohair, but it's a very, very similar process. This, in my opinion, is truly like the definition of a beginner art yarn. I really think there's no wrong way to do a lock spin except if it falls apart on you. So I'm going to show you how to do it in a way that's going to ensure that your lock spinning is not going to fall apart. I also think that lock spinning reminds us of some of the very basic concepts of spinning that we as spinners can sometimes, like, there are lessons that in the beginning they rapidly change our spinning, but sometimes we kind of like almost forget those basics as time goes by. I think especially when it comes to drafting, staple length, the distance we have between our two hands, and keeping that consistent with longer fibers as well. Not that this Wensleydale is particularly long, however, it is definitely like a true lock. We've got a decent amount of length here. I'll give us a measurement in a minute. Maybe it's just me and because I know a lot of crafty people, but if you're having like a baby shower or a bridal shower or even a conference and you need something to include in your gift baskets, highly recommend including like one of these soft tape measures. I just think they're really helpful for people who sew and craft and do lots of things in general. So yeah, actually I was totally lying to you before. This is like 5.5 inches. That's pretty substantial. That makes me laugh. I guess it's because I use a lot of Teeswater, and I learned to lock spin with Teeswater, which is notoriously a lengthy fiber. A lot of it was like 6+ inches. Now that I guess think about it. But this is the Wensleydale that we're going to use today. I hand dyed this with logwood. If you want to see a little bit of that process, I'll put the video for that below. However, I'm really, really happy with the way these natural dyes came out, and I've been wanting to spin up some of this fiber. So a lot of the more difficult part of lock spinning is honestly the prep. It's all at the beginning. What I mean by this is, as you can see, as beautiful as these locks are, we cannot spin them this way. Or I should say, you can. I have my very, very, very first lock spin. That's what I did. I didn't know I had to prep the fiber or fluff it, or pluck it is really, I think, the technical term, beforehand. And so when I tried to spin it, not only was it difficult and more slippery than wool should be, especially a longer wool like this, but in addition, the yarn fell apart no matter how much twist I put into it, because I was not plucking it and opening it up in a way that allowed when you look at the fiber, a fiber in general, it kind of has, like, it has scales. It has a scale structure. That's why wool and a lot of other fibers felt, because that scale structure can open up a ton under heat, and then under friction, those scales get sort of like locked between each other. At least that's how I understand like felting and friction to work. That's probably not the most scientific explanation, so, but like roughly that's kind of how it works, right? So we use that scale structure in spinning to our advantage. So that's why a lot of people will say that spinning wool is a really easy and great first place to start, because that scale structure, it's not as slippery. That's why spinning wool is not as slippery as like spinning something like silk or cotton, because that scale structure is either non-present entirely or it is not as defined as in wool. Alpaca, it's like slightly less scale than wool, so alpaca is slightly more slippery than wool, with Surrey alpaca being like probably the most slippery, at least in my experience. Anyway, that's kind of my like short ramble on why we can't just, or we shouldn't spin this just the way it is. We need to pluck it open. Now I have a bag right here of already fluffed up fiber, so you can first see what it looks like, right? We're opening the lock, we're fluffing it up, but we are careful not to completely lose the like lock structure, right? Because we want those those locks to shine through when we're doing the spin. Now, some of the ways that we accomplish this is, first, we're not going to like smooth our yarn while we're spinning it, and I'm going to show you guys a like nice long clip example of me lock spinning so you can kind of see exactly what I'm doing and what I'm not doing. Let's be honest with this one, it's more what I'm not doing, because we're not going to be smoothing the yarn, right? Because we want these little locks to show through in the finished yarn. We want it to be curly like the sheep was, right? That's essentially what a lock spin or a wolf spin is accomplishing. And if you want less curls, right, you can pluck your curls more. You can maybe even comb a few of them and kind of like mix it in intermittently. Do it the way that you want to do it, but I like to leave it with lots of curl structure. And so I'm going to show you guys how to pluck the locks, but not over pluck the locks. And it really is something that, like, the first time I did it, I definitely overplucked some and underplucked others, and with time you will just get better at gauging what the right amount of fluffing is to do for the lock spin that you're trying to accomplish. Okay, so things you need to prep your lock spinning yarn. You need some locks, right? You need your hands, or the helping hands of somebody else. And in my opinion, if you wear a big pant, this just makes it a lot easier. Maybe that's a really kind of Gen Z opinion of me to have, but the big pant makes this so much easier because I can kind of just have like a workspace here, and I like to work in my lap and listen to a podcast and sometimes yap with y'all. So this is what you're gonna do. You're gonna get some of your locks. Start with the bigger ones, right? Let's start with the easier ones here. So this is what the locks look like beforehand, just a little before shot. And we're gonna start just pulling them apart. Like this. Right? And some of them we're gonna kind of pull apart more, and some of them a little bit less. And we're gonna leave more of a tail on some of them. And again, we're just kind of like, the more you disorganize the fibers, essentially, like here is some fluffed up. The more you disorganize these fibers, the easier it's kind of going to be for them to like catch on one another. Like they'll kind of hold together just on that scale structure. And that's kind of how you know you've hit it, when you start to get kind of like a cloud, and like the bigger ones again are definitely a lot easier, right? Because you can kind of just like, you can almost see how that would be really easy to draft. Whereas like the smaller ones, oftentimes, right, like I want that little curl at the end. So I'm just gonna fluff up one end and not pull it all the way down. And if you do pull it all the way down here, I'll show you on this one, you kind of just get, like you really lose that structure. Not entirely, as you can see, but you've lost more of it when you separate that tip. And there are a lot of people who are going to be like, well, there's dirt and there's lanolin in that tip, but I have scoured this fiber extensively. This was also a lamb fleece, so it wasn't that dirty to begin with. And then I dyed it, which also puts it through not another scouring, but another cleaning process. And then before this yarn gets used, or perhaps gets sent out to one of you lovely folks, it will get at least 2 to 3 more baths, especially because this is a dye, this is a natural dye. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not really worried about the dirt. And this is what your fiber is going to start to look like. Again, like side by side. And you're going to see too, this is a lesson in color for all of us, right? So this looks darker than this, and there's a reason for that. There's actually like a scientific color science. I think it has to do with light specifically. So when fibers are all aligned, when they're combed, the light reflects off of it more, and so fiber will often look brighter or darker in color. And you can see this illustrated on dyed comb top. When you spin it up, it often loses some of the color, right? And that's because even if you're doing a very short forward worsted style spin is the word that I'm looking for here, there is still some disalignment of the fiber compared to when it was perfectly aligned, and so the color will not look as vibrant. Again, loose scientific explanation here, but that's one of the reasons that woolen preparations and like hand carded like fiber and bats and things just look quote unquote less vibrant in general. It has nothing to do with the actual like dyeing of the fiber. It actually is like light and color science, and I do think that's something that's really interesting and worthwhile knowing. Like this is very vibrant, but this is the fiber once it's prepared, and this is closer to like what the yarn is probably going to look like. Still pretty vibrant and dark, but like definitely looks different than this. So we have fluffed up all of our locks, as you guys can see, and now we're actually going to start the spinning process. So just a few notes, just like when you're spinning anything else, but now, more importantly than ever, it is important to remind ourselves of some of the basics that come with spinning. Be mindful of your staple length, right? So I have 5.5 inches as the average staple length on this fiber. And as a result, I need to be mindful of that. If my hands are too close together, it's going to be really hard for this fiber to draft and spin. I'm going to have to do a lot more stopping and starting in general. The other main thing to be mindful of while you're spinning this is that you really don't want to have too tight of a grip on your fiber. And I am guilty of this just like everybody else. However, whenever I end up like loosening my grip quite a bit, I am very quick to realize that like that was the issue, and it makes the spinning a lot easier. So just don't have a death grip on your fiber, right? You wanna hold it gently, like you're holding an egg or something like that, right? And as you can see, I kind of start it like any other yarn, and then I just start spinning. If I am at the size that I like, that I'm happy with, I'll be like, okay. In this case, I do think I kind of want it a little bit thicker, and I think it'll be easier to draft a bit thicker at this highest ratio here, or I'm sorry, lowest ratio here. And I think that'll make things a little bit easier. Turn up the ratio, and we're gonna move along the bobbin just a bit. There we go. That's about that. I want some thicker singles here for this lock spun yarn. So as you can see, right, we're drafting. I am letting the twist enter this fiber cloud that I have, and that kind of just makes it easier for like the right locks to catch on each other and sort of pull forward. Okay, so I adjusted our angle a little bit here so that you guys can actually see the drafting a lot clearer, and I also changed the background so we have a little bit more contrast, so it's just easier to see in general. I don't know, it's my first time kind of showing this actual part of the spinning, so if you guys have suggestions on the angle, listen, for realsies, I'm not gonna do the top-down angle. Like, if you want to see my feet, that's just not gonna happen. You're just not gonna see my feet. That's just not something I'm gonna put on the internet. Sorry. So yeah, this is what we're working with for now. And again, as you can see, I am really trying to let that twist enter the fiber, and then I'm pinching to control the twist. However, I am not smoothing, because if we smooth, we might risk losing some of these lovely locks. One tip that I do have as well is that, as you will notice that like as this kind of clump of locks gets smaller and smaller, the drafting is going to get a little bit more difficult, and you might have more of a tendency to have a really tight grip on your fiber. I know that I do. And so in that case, you're just going to replenish it with more locks and continue on with your spinning. Another reason that it's good to kind of just be conscious of your staple length is also, if you get a part that's a little too thin for your preference and you want to take it apart, just a reminder that like that staple length is present. So kind of move your hands pretty far apart when you're pulling that fiber apart, because if they're just too close together, no matter how much pulling you do, you're just not going to be able to get it apart, because unless you rip the fiber. So also just, keep that in mind when you're maybe fixing things, especially if you want more consistent lock spun singles and you are shooting for that consistency. However, I do think, again, one of the fun parts about lock spinning is that this is a yarn that it just looks good, kind of no matter how it comes out, in my opinion. Whether it's more consistent or thick and thin, doesn't really matter. It just looks rad as hell. Other troubleshooting issue that you might run into is that if you find that while you're spinning, all of this feels a little too slippery, that the locks are easily slipping away from each other and they're just not holding together, this might not really be a twist issue. There's a high likelihood that you just didn't fluff up the locks enough, and so there's nothing to really catch on for the scale structure. In that case, all you have to do is go back and fluff up your locks a little extra and then get back to spinning. Alrighty, and here is the finished bobbin of yarn. You can turn this into a 2-ply, you can turn this into a 3-ply, you could ply it to another lock spin, you could ply it to a normal spun yarn. You can experiment with what you want to do with this lock spun base. I'm going to keep this as singles because the lock spun singles have really been doing it for me recently, and I just love the really tonal way this logwood ended up spinning up. I think it came out fantastic. I don't really want to do anything else to it. So for me personally, I do think it's easier to take the yarn off of a bobbin when you have a lazy Kate, even if it's a DIY one. I used a DIY one out of a cardboard box and some knitting needles for the longest time. Now I have this one. I also got this piece secondhand, so that's why we have it now. And I am going to take this off of the bobbin and put it onto my nitty dotty that I have to turn it into a hank. And here's the finished yarn, fiber friends, completely washed and dried and skeined up, or I guess hanked up technically. It's about 52 yards, and I think this came out spectacular. This is a really locky yarn. Obviously, if you want less locks sticking out, you can have less locks sticking out. If you want more locks sticking out, you can make it more locky if you want to. I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. I hope this helps, and go make your own lock spun yarn. It's a really fun yarn to make. And again, I just think you can't be mad at the results. Like this, it's hard to make all this look ugly. Don't forget, if you like this tutorial in general and you want to see more, subscribe, leave a comment below if there are other art yarns you want to see. And we'll see you on the next one.